I want to welcome you all to the first panel of the semester. As part of what we bring to you, a tremendous faculty, learning from among yourselves, elite, smart people, right? We also are able to bring you distinguished panels such as we have today. With that, I will welcome our moderator who will introduce the panel and moderate, which is Dr. Kostakopoulos, the Deputy Academic Director and Lecturer. Thank you.
Thanks. So it gives me great pleasure and honor. It's actually an honor for me to moderate a panel consisting of such brilliant professionals at the most prestigious banking organizations representing the globe. These are all global banks: Bank of America, Société Générale, Commerzbank, and Bank of Tokyo, MUFG. I didn't bother to add up all their assets, but I can tell you that they comprise a big percentage of global banking assets. So it's a great pleasure for me to be doing this. And since I know we have a lot of questions, and I know that you will have questions, we will get the questions going. And the first question would be to our panelists, so they can tell us the trajectory of their career. So that would be for your benefit. Starting with Dr. Ashcraft from the Fed and now from Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and then going down to the rest of our panelists. Adam?
Sure. No, thanks, Bob. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you about careers in risk management. When I was young, I didn't grow up as a little kid thinking that I wanted to be a risk manager. I think most of us, maybe not most of us, some of us had other ideas of what we wanted to do. I got a Ph.D. in economics and thought I was going to be a professor, and started my career at the Federal Reserve doing academic research. It didn't take long before the financial crisis hit, and the Federal Reserve realized that there were higher and better uses of PhD's capabilities than writing papers for academic journals, that we needed to design some liquidity programs and manage some risk. So I quickly shifted into helping the Federal Reserve develop tools to fight the crisis, and then we realized we have a bunch of risk on our balance sheet that we never had before. We probably should have a risk management function to figure out what to do with it. And so spent several years then helping to build out risk management capabilities that the Fed still has today. From there, I made a move from managing risk to supervising people who manage risk, spending 3 years in illicit bank supervision, basically managing what's known as the liquidity program, or basically CLAR, which is basically the illicit program for supervising the liquidity positions and risk management of the largest financial institutions. About a year and a half ago, I made a transition to the private sector and realized that it's not all that different from working at the Federal Reserve in terms of just being another big organization where it takes 1 million people to make a decision. But here in my current role, I'm focused on building models and managing teams of people who are focused on building the bank new capabilities for how to measure risk.
Thank you, Adam. Didier Blanchard is the managing director, as is Adam Ashcraft's title, managing director. So Didier is managing director and head of ERM for Société Générale Americas, North and South America. Didier.
So yeah, I'm extremely happy to be here, and especially as the name of my department matches so well the name of the program you're all in. So I didn't start actually as an ERM manager. That thing didn't exist for a number of years. I started in the 90s as a French regulator. So we have a few things in common. And very quickly within that regulator, I shifted to risk modeling, a thing that they didn't know how to do to predict bank defaults, which was pretty useful and survived until the early 2010s, so it lasted. But I also quickly got tired also of some of the decision-making processes, and then shifted to BNP Paribas, another large French bank, where I headed the Basel II program until BNP got approved under the advanced IRB approach. I spent 2 years during the lovely financial crisis of 2007 to 9 at the front office, living a real risk experience, actually, in market activities. And I moved to Société Générale to head their global risk measurement group in Paris, which I did for 7 years. It was something comprising model building, model validation, portfolio analysis, stress testing, financial communication, a number of pretty interesting things. And then I felt the need for seeing new horizons. And so often it can take the shape of moving to another jurisdiction and country, which I did. So I moved to the US 4 years ago to create from scratch the enterprise risk management department at SG for the Americas region, which I still head today. So, and this comprises a number of things like risk appetite setting, risk reporting up to the board, stress testing, risk identification and assessment, managing the internal control framework, or the risk governance. So this is all I'm doing today.
Okay, thank you, Didier. The next person is Thomas Kartanowicz. Many of you know him because he's been a guest lecturer. He's the Chief Information Security Officer of the German bank Commerzbank. Thomas.
Thank you. First of all, it's an honor to be here and to speak to some familiar faces again. My career started on a kind of different trajectory. I started out back in the day working for IT help desk. And my first exposure to enterprise risk was working for a university, and the dean's computer was down. And in terms of prioritization and risk treatment, it was stat, get it fixed. Slowly, I worked my way into systems administration and other areas of IT, eventually transitioning to information security. My first exposure to banking was at Natixis, another French bank. I was the head of information security there for several years. That's where I discovered that InfoSec at the time, it wasn't cyber yet, InfoSec was basically being bounced around. It didn't have a home. So I was part of corporate security, which included physical security and facilities. Interesting combo. Then moving into compliance, where people were talking about Dodd-Frank. Not quite cyber. Finally, a home and a more fitting home was operational risk. For me, for my career development, that was very much a game changer. So I started to learn about lines of defense, where I fit into it, risk appetite, etc. And it really helped to have the technical skills and to increase those op risk skills. Finally, about a year and a half ago, I made the jump to another foreign bank, Commerzbank, where I'm now the Regional Chief Information Security Officer. I really have one foot in technology as a practitioner. The other foot is in enterprise risk. And I find that I'm a kind of level 1.5 within the organization. I still get questions from the CEO about computers not working, and I think that will always be the plight of a cyber professional. But it's good to be here.
Thank you, Thomas. The next panelist is Tian. He's the Director of Wholesale Credit Risk Modeling at MUFG. Jay.
Thank you, Bob. So happy to be here to see new faces. Feel like I'm younger again. So unlike my fellow panelists, I knew I wanted to be a risk manager when I was a kid. Just kidding. So I started, I went to school in the engineering program. Actually, I went for the ultimate Ph.D. program in the aerospace engineering. So I got my Ph.D. In that about 12 years ago. And so towards the end of my study, I was doing like experiments in the wind tunnel, days in and day out. It was very interesting, but I wasn't talking to anyone, right? So I was like working with machines all day long. So I got a little bored towards the end. I decided to explore my options, and then I learned about financial engineering program and all the quants in the industry, all the famous quants you probably heard of. So I decided to look into that program. Actually fits my skill set fits pretty well So got into to Cornell's financial engineering program. Having said that, like after so many years working in the industry, I feel like it's so much easier working with machines compared to working with people. So
come to IT.
Yeah, exactly. So after I graduated from Cornell, it was the height of the financial crisis, 2009. So it was super hard to find a job, and obviously the top choice for me was to trying to go to a front desk as a trader support as a quant for that. That's why I went into the financial engineering, but it was impossible at that time. But fortunately at that time, because of all the regulations, scrutiny, enhancement, and Moody's credit rating agency. So Moody's, they have this very new group to review, challenge all the rating methodologies, rating models. So I got into a good position there and started a new group, worked with my supervisor building this new team. I was the first in the group. So we built a very big team over there. So I'm in credit, so I'm still in credit. So I spent a few years in Moody's. And after that, actually took a little detour. I went into a private equity firm for a little bit. I just love the name of private equity. So I wanted to experience that, but that wasn't a very good firm. So I decided to leave again. So that's when I joined MUFG. It's probably one of the biggest banks in the world you have never heard of. So it is the largest bank in Japan, and I think it's top 5 in the whole world by assets. So the bank is building presence in the United States. We acquired Union Bank mostly on the West Coast. So now it's top 20 in the United States, but we're trying to build up to top 10 in the United States. So for me, I joined the bank about 8 years ago. So I joined the credit risk management team. So that was my expertise. And I also tried to move to, I actually did move to the front line, so first line in the portfolio management group. So I did have a lot of experience working with the people who work with clients directly, supporting them and try to grow the business in the Americas. But most recently, a couple of years ago, I moved to my current position, which is the credit risk modeling team. So my responsibility is mainly developing the credit rating models. So you're probably very familiar with to rate different corporations, financial institutions, finance companies, all of those. But most recently, another reason I joined this current team is that we're also expanding in terms of technology. So we're building out, we're just starting, but we're trying to build out machine learning, AI-related projects to apply that to the credit risk domain. That's one of the things I'm focusing on, and also I'm very excited to do those things. I'm sure you guys have good classes on those, so we can talk about that later.
Great. Well, thank you, Jay. So as you see, our panelists come from diverse backgrounds, but they all seem to end up in the same sort of field. So the field is quite diverse. So I'd like to ask our panelists how important are communication skills for risk professionals, and as far as their performance, their effectiveness. And I'll start with Adam.
Sure. I mean, from my perspective, your communication skills are as important as your technical skills. It's really important for you to figure out how to communicate effectively with people throughout organizations in order to do your job and to be sure that your risk organization is achieving its mission. Start off by, you need to have really good listening skills. which means that it's really important to be able to sit down, listen to somebody, understanding what they're saying, why they're saying it, and be able to pay attention, because a lot of communication is about figuring out how ultimately to be influential. In the risk organization, you're going to ultimately need to convince people to do things that they probably don't want to do. You know, while the risk framework will always give you the opportunity to escalate disagreements, the reality of the world is that most senior people want their junior people to have the capability of sitting down and having a conversation and working through an issue and being sure that they understand where the areas of disagreement are. So only escalation happens in extreme circumstances. But to be able to do that, you need to be able to communicate effectively with people. It means be able to relate with people that might have a very different background and experience, be able to understand where they're coming from and why they ultimately disagree with you, and then be able to, when you do disagree, describe that in a way that's can be easily summarized in a few bullet points to your manager when they have to go and escalate it, and then have a conversation with that person's manager about what's going on. So communication is just really important. It's not just about technical skills. I also wanted to emphasize that your interpersonal skills are really important too. Understanding, you know, how to write emails, understanding how and when to use, you know, instant messaging platforms. These are all types of things that can just kind of get you into trouble if you don't use them thoughtfully. And so it's really helpful to apply a great deal of conservatism in thinking about, you know, how to interact in the workplace. So, but being smart is an important part of the job, but given that ultimately your job is about working through other people to get things done, you need to communicate effectively.
Thank you, Adam. Jay, did you want to add something?
Absolutely, I 100% agree with that. And it's as important, if not more, than your technical skills. So I think it's important, especially for people whose first language is not English. It's very you have to make additional effort, right? It's not my first language, but you have to make additional effort in terms of communication. Like Adam said, all the importance of the communication in your job. So I'm not going to repeat everything, and then I just want to give you some maybe concrete examples of why is that important. So right now we're actually in the performance evaluation cycle for my team. It's for my company, but we are on a different cycle because most people do that end of year, but we end our year in March end. So we're doing that. So one of the things we have to do is to rank our employees, right? So, and also we have to rank across teams. So I have a team, and then we have different team managers. But we have to rank across teams, right? So just imagine, like, some people I don't even know. I know, but I don't work with them a lot, right? And how do I compare some people on other teams compared to my employee? And without that information I have, and it's very hard for managers to rank. So this is where communication skills come in, right? So during when you go into, after your graduation, go into a company, you work with different people, and just try to speak up, especially for second language speakers, and try to speak up wherever you can, and whatever opportunities you have, just present yourself to other managers, other senior members. So when we come to this time and we have that reference, have that information, and then I can remember someone who speak up in the meetings, who have good ideas in the meetings. So that's a concrete example of communication skills, and that's super important if you want to advance in your career.
That's an excellent point, and I, in the same boat as you, English is my second language, and you do have to make an extra effort to, in order to showcase your talents and capabilities. And in terms of communication skills, you know, for our panelists' information, strategic communications is a core competency of our course. So it's one of the core courses that Sim actually developed that as a specialist in the field, one of his specialists. Another question that is coming up is integrating into ERM information security. Technology, information technology risk, corporate security, cyber, in terms of ESG, environmental, social, governance, general controls, compliance, data privacy, which is a big item. So Thomas, I think as the Chief Information Security Officer, you take first crack at this.
Sure. Speaking as a CISO, as a former IT person, these different risk stripes, it's really fundamentally comes down to this. IT has to mature, step out of the comfort zone, right? Traditionally, IT was very siloed. It kept to itself. But now cyber risk, data privacy risks, et cetera, these are enterprise problems. There's significant business impact. And the decision of where to allocate resources, what to protect, how to protect it, these are questions IT professionals cannot answer alone, right? We can't do this in a vacuum. We need to understand what's important to the business. We need to understand what the business's risk appetite is. So we need to start to have connections into enterprise risk. So if I were to say, in an ideal world, what would you do? You start with a tone at the top. You need to have that senior management backing to make this work. Practical example, when I joined Commerzbank, there really wasn't any kind of steering committee for cybersecurity. Risk was over here, cyber's over here, IT's there, marketing's back there. It's all discombobulated. Getting the buy-in from management that all of these people have to be on the same committee, it sounds simple, but it took some effort to get that, but it reaps rewards. It shows that management takes this seriously, and you have that kind of backing when you have to make decisions and get things done. So governance as an overall topic, very, very important. After that, as a cyber practitioner, you need a framework. You need to be able to have repeated results. You need to have a usually international standard working for an international bank. Things like the NIST cybersecurity framework, ISO 27001, COBIT for IT risk. Choose one of them. Choose an amalgamation of it. Choose something, right? And then you could start understanding for the various controls, what are the risk limits? Talk about something like patching technology, patching servers. Is 95% acceptable? Is 90% acceptable? Me as a practitioner, I could be lazy and say 50%, but that's not acceptable, right? That's where you start to explain, well, if patching doesn't fulfill all these needs, what's the business impact? Maybe the patching of trading systems should be at a different level of importance than the patching of something else. And that's where that understanding of the business and enterprise risk comes in. So you have the framework. You then have to start reporting on these things. You have to have various risk control self-assessments, to borrow a phrase from OpRisk. In my world, that could take different forms. It's still, you could have self-assessments by IT, or I could perform those assessments as a second-line function. But getting a sense of where you stand, what your maturity level is, and reporting that up to the board to point out what needs to be decided upon for financing, for budget, for mitigating risks. Again, IT can't make those decisions by itself, so you need that virtuous circle of assess, determine appetite, report, rinse and repeat. And what I described in 3 minutes here, it could take years to successfully implement. I'm still struggling with it, but this is what we're trying to achieve. What I've seen in other organizations is a move in that direction, but the real takeaway is IT has to also just grow up and get out of the cave. So that's my view on that.
Thank you, Thomas. In terms of skills and tools used in your area, whether it be ERM as an example, right? Does ERM rely on specific data, models, and information technologies? And what makes them innovative? Didier?
So maybe I'm going to discuss something which is rarely taught yet. When people think about new technologies and everything, you always immediately jump to AI and every buzzword you hear around. So, and people overlook a number of skills which are absolutely necessary. I would say the first skill you need to have to work in risk management and sustain a career probably for, let's say, 40 years out and in risk management, it's unavoidable now that you will have to have some technology exposure over your career. I don't see that anyone is going to be out of there. And basically, everybody is so afraid of technology. And by the way, they will say also, how is it useful to be trained today to technologies that will not be the same at all in, let's say, 5, 10 years, 20 years? Well, there are things that don't change, believe me. One of them is the ability, if you are going to make a career, not on the IT development side, but everybody's an IT user now. So as a risk manager or front office or anything, it's the ability to represent whatever you do under a data model. So ability to think in if then else, ability to think in relational databases, and that has been around for more time than for longer than my career. Actually, I would say that while I can quite fluently develop something in SQL, which I learned because I had to probably like 15 years ago on a project, everything is so much the same under slightly different shapes. It was before and it's still now. The ability to use identifiers, to relate them together, to put clearly your ideas under tables, attributes, reasoning under the form of a computation is always the same. So my first recommendation is never overlook that. This is maybe something you could see as a soft skill, but I'm seeing more and more it makes the difference between the people that make a career and the ones that stay aside in a way. More and more we're going to see people that cannot lead some projects or some teams because they don't understand how data and systems work. Not to be a specialist, really understand how the conceptual model fits in. So here, yes, we have in ERM, and I come to my specific space, innovative information technologies. They're innovative in the way that they're not innovative. They are, so what I call the GRC, governance, risk and compliance technologies, are simply a way to build, I would say, even relational databases. So you see like something that's been around forever, using the fact that now it's easier to implement and it's cheaper to implement, so it's faster to implement as well. You bring data from the whole institution, like in market risk, in credit risk, op risk, compliance risk, anything. And at first you had, like, I would say, data models, let's say, in market risk and in operational risk that have nothing in common. And that's where we stood for decades, literally. Everybody made progress in their own field, but no one communicated. And then we came like the enterprise risk managers, and we say, okay, either we keep extracting data and putting them on Excel, and that's it, or we try to find a way to enjoy the new technologies and bring those data in. And finally, those technologies which are so-called innovative, and as I said, are probably not that much, are an ability to say, well, all those risks are made of the same components. In all of them, you will find things like risk events. Well, you know, the bad thing that happens, a market loss, an operational incident, credit default, whatever. Okay, that's the same. You have issues like the root causes of problems that keep bothering you. You have risk assessments. Everybody assesses risks, and it always takes the same shape, more or less, if you know how to put it together. You have risk controls. You have risk metrics, super important. Know how to play with the metrics and analytics is probably one of the key skills. That's why I always have a kind of tenderness for my quantitative friends. They have a kind of built-in ability to understand analytics, but it pervades every domain of risk management. So basically, a few editors came with a miracle solution that was just a kind of good relational database able to extract data from every portion of the risk systems and put them together so that we could build for the first time, actually, in decades, reporting to top management, putting together all the elements coming from a variety of data. And by structuring those data in a unique way, we were now able to launch research into those data, which is the field that now you know. Everybody speaks about machine learning, artificial intelligence. Once you have the data, and the better structured, the better anything else will be, you can start playing with that. So actually, those new technologies in ERM enabled creating databases that we had never seen before. Like, for example, we could see that some departments or some activities or some products had simultaneously control issues, a larger number of events, of recurring events, unsolved issues, late action plans, bad ratings assessing their risk management effectiveness, and troubling analytics. And you come to some kind of cross-risk analysis that you could never make before. And once you've built that basis, and I say again, it's a key skill to be able to do that. It can support you for decades if you know how to acquire it and to maintain it and to adapt to anything new that comes to the market. Then you can launch into more advanced technologies, which are a great quantitative use of all those data that you've amassed here. So I think, Jay, you have lovely examples of those usages.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone here agrees that data is probably one of the biggest challenges for every area, and data quality is so important, and we normally struggle with data quality. So that's one of the bases. Like, if you don't have data, I think Didier mentioned that as well. But from technology point of view, I think we mentioned like you hear all the buzzwords, machine learning, AI. So for some, I think it's machine learning, and they have been out for like 20 years. But because the computing power and also some of the programming methodologies that have been released by the technology firms, has been really driving up the effort in other areas. So financial industry now is trying. I think everyone, especially senior management, they when they hear those buzzwords, and then they get excited, and then when they present to their board members, they get excited too. So, as Didier mentioned, it's a very exciting area, but also fundamentals, like Didier mentioned, those are very important too. But in terms of AI, so what we have in our bank is that it's very at the beginning stage. So we are looking at using machine learning models to recreate some of the rating models. So traditionally, the rating models are very simple, based on statistical analysis and linear regression, logistic regression. But now with the help of AI and machine learning, we can expand. Obviously, once we have the data, we can expand our, especially towards some of the lower tier, meaning smaller companies, individuals. So for larger companies, you can't really do that because you don't have enough data. So towards the lower end, we're trying to develop the technology, see if that can streamline a lot of the processes, and also the automation. So in terms of data automation, from the customer submit their financial statements, submit their tax forms. Grabbing that data is not easy. So grabbing everything in the tax form is not easy. We're trying to build out the automation processes to eliminate a lot of the manual work in between. So that's before you go to AI, and after you get all the data, and then applying machine learning techniques to. We have seen the performance are better than linear regression, obviously, but one of the biggest challenges it is about black box. So the interpretability is one of the drawbacks of the machine learning. So there are obviously techniques you can use to try to explain the results, and that's one of the main areas that regulators they're looking for. How do you explain your results. So that's, if you're in this area, that's something you need to think about and look into as well.
I want to look into Goldman Sachs' experience on using AI on liquidity risk.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
so you mentioned Goldman.
Very interesting, but I want to move to the next question. But that's the next question has to do with what type of experience, business experience, if you're a trader or a manager of a business unit or what credit analyst, business analyst, what sort of experience informs a successful career in risk management? Adam?
Sure, that's a good question. So I mean, I've hired people in a bunch of different organizations to come into risk management. First at the Fed when we were trying to manage exposure we had on our balance sheet in the crisis, and there our needs were quite unique. We needed people who understood the exposure that we had on the balance sheet. So I mean, some of the answer to this question is going to depend on where you are in the cycle and what the circumstances of the organization are. So their experience with respect to asset classes that are in distress is highly important. When I was hiring bank supervisors, largely to assess whether or not institutions were managing themselves very well, there you drew a little bit on experience, but as with my current role, you start to think more about general skills. And while experience can be helpful, what I found in the past is that hiring largely on the basis of experience can get you into a bit of trouble, and that you really need to focus primarily on the intelligence and communication skills of the people that you're looking at. So we try really hard to make people think outside of their experience and demonstrate that they can think critically, that they've demonstrated that they have, outside of their work experience, been able to develop new skills on their own and learn, and have shown an interest in learning, that they actually read books, outside of work that are helping them to improve themselves. And along the lines of what we talked about with communication, that they can have a substantive two-way communication with you, understand your question, not just give an answer, but answer a follow-up question and engage you in conversation about a substantive issue. So I would probably, at least within the range of places where I'm hiring, rely less on experience than people that have a high degree of intelligence and good communication skills.
Thank you so much. A related question is, in your career, which other backgrounds, for example, someone with a history or political science or philosophy or physics, chemical engineering, those backgrounds, how do they, can they be successful in risk management? Thomas?
Sure, so I'll take that question. From my own experiences, I actually had a minor in philosophy, and an interest in history. And it's actually been very useful to stay grounded when dealing with fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? The FUD factor, especially in cybersecurity. There's a tendency among senior management and other types to react to every single headline in the Wall Street Journal, to overreact. And knowing the history of the field, knowing that problems have happened before, maybe the particulars are different, it helps you stay focused and not panic and overreact. I think there's a quote from a philosopher about, if you don't remember the past, you're condemned to repeat it. There's some wisdom there. And I know that cyber is a relatively new field, but IT isn't. Computing isn't. Risk isn't. And when trying to explain risk and trying to explain different solutions, here's where I see philosophy coming in helpful, is knowing how to actually debate. Knowing that a room of people yelling and screaming and having ad hominem attacks is not really going to be productive. So being able to present yourself, understand the different sides of the arguments, almost master rhetoric, really, can be constructive, can be very helpful. And again, philosophy, history gives you that depth and that perspective that I have been in the field when Y2K was starting to become a major problem. There were viruses then called Melissa and I Love You. Great names. These things still happen 20 years later. And having that depth and that understanding of the historical mindset it gives you perspective that is very helpful, especially when trying to mentor and teach the younger generation as well, and just gives you that depth that you need.
Thank you, Thomas. I want to move to the next question, and that is which risks from, let's say, market, liquidity, credit, cyber, operational, do you find as the most important now? Adam?
Sure. So I can just speak from the perspective of when I was in bank supervision, where in my prior role, not only was I executive in charge of the liquidity program, I was on the operating committee that was responsible for helping to plan the whole supervisory program. And I can tell you that as of 2 years ago, supervisors' focus was less so on some of the traditional risks like liquidity and credit risk, with a recognition that most financial institutions have made significant advancement in their capabilities and positions of liquidity and capital since the financial crisis. And we're starting to focus a lot more on things like operational risk, compliance risk, information security. And from a resource perspective, they were taking supervisors out of those traditional programs that were focused on capital and liquidity, putting them in places like operational risk, compliance, and information security, and trying really hard to think about how to set expectations for risk management in those areas. So while in my current role, I don't have that perspective, but for my prior role, I can tell you that that's where they were focused on.
Thank you, Adam. Now, the next question is in terms of your advice to the students, in terms of who are interested, who are of course risk management, ERM students. How important is it for new hires in risk management to have an ERM Master of Science program? Adam, I think it.
Sure. So I think it's something that can be helpful, but I don't think it's necessary. I think what you'll see is there's a wide range of hiring approaches across organizations, and so just like getting into graduate programs that probably have a wide range of approaches for selecting students, companies have a wide range of approaches for figuring out how to hire students. And so for some people, they'll love it and they'll put your resume to the top of the pack. For others, their preferences are just looking for other things. So I think that it's helpful, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how are you going to perform in an interview? How are you going to present yourself? Can you answer questions intelligently? Are you prepared to ask questions intelligently? And do you know how to close an interview and leave a good impression at the end? So those are the things that I think are important.
Ray, did you want to add something?
I totally agree with that. So I think obviously with the Columbia pedigree, you have a good name on your resume, so it helps to get into an interview. So when we have a pile of resumes, we look at Columbia program. So there is an advantage in terms of getting in there, but in the end, it's up to you, right? So it's you, how you perform in the interview, and after you get in, how you advance in your career, it's you. So it doesn't really matter which school you went to, MIT, Columbia, Cornell, doesn't really matter. I think in terms of the advice, I think I'm a little younger than those guys, so I think I'm still trying to be them. So, but I think from my point of view, well, I think we touched upon in the communication that you have to get out of your comfort zone, right? When you're in meetings, try to express yourself, try to speak out and express your opinions, and then show your drive, be proactive, and just to be seen. And try. Another thing is, especially if you're on a more senior level, it's like try to build a network, try to build a hub. So everyone from different organizations, you build a hub, and then you try to be very valuable to the entire risk management organization. That's how you advance, especially towards the senior roles.
Thank you, Jay. I know we're getting close to 5 o'clock, but I do have a couple of questions, and let's see if we can squeeze them in. The next question is, how is ERM organized in a large financial institution? Jay?
Yeah, maybe very quickly, I think it's important you have the higher level view in terms of how the risk management organization is organized, and so when you go into your interviews, you understand where you are, who are you interviewing, and when you get a job, and don't lose sight of the bigger organization when you try to move up, right? So in my organization, so we under CRO, Chief Risk Officer, we have credit risk is separate. So we have credit risk. So on the credit risk, we got transaction levels. The credit divisions, they basically review the transactions, approve. So they give their credit opinions, and then together we have a portfolio level credit risk management. So it's more look at different methodologies, look at policies, models. So I'm in this organization, and risk appetite, capital, all those, and then so that's credit risk, and then we got market risk. So that under market risk, there's a liquidity risk, there's a counterparty credit risk, counterparty risk, and then on the other side, we got the operational risk management. So in that, there is a model risk management. So they actually review all the models my team develop. So the model risk, and another thing under op risk is reputational risk management. So which is event driven. So you want to look at the headline risk. And then we do have a information risk arm, which look at basically cybersecurity, and then the compliance risk division. So they look at the financial crimes. So that's how.
Vincent, right? So Didier, did you about ERM and also about the type of skills that you look for in your ERM risk staff?
Yeah, the skills come directly from the way we organize and what we ask from people in that organization. So in terms of organization, by the way, it was like 4 years ago when I came to the US, and we started making it a real head office instead of just being an integrated part of the group as the regulators wanted us to do. It's exactly the question my boss made me, like, how are we going to organize all of that? So ERM had to write all those governance documents setting the lines of defense and everything. So the first thing that people forget, most of the risk management jobs are in the first line of defense. I mean, they're integrated in the business lines and the very close support functions. If you look at IT risk or cybersecurity, you'd better not have risk management being the first line of defense there. You'd better have them into the IT department or information security department managing it day to day. Second line of defense comes then to do effective challenge, and that leads a little bit to the kind of skills that we're looking for. So first thing, every risk type that you mentioned has to be represented in the first line of defense. It's been a continuous battle to make sure that the old model, I would say the pre-crisis model, where business lines outsource their risk management to the risk department is not coming back again. This gives directly Lehman Brothers. I have to say that if business lines are just here to make business, whatever the risk, and you have a bunch of poor guys somewhere less well paid in a faraway department trying to stop them if they can, well, usually they will not be able. So that model has lived. Now, I would say maybe 3/4 of the jobs in risk management should be in the first line of defense, in the business lines, in the close support functions. Then you've got the second line of defense, risk management department, compliance departments, which are part of that. And we created an ERM specific department to say, okay, all of this needs to have someone who overlooks that oversees all of that. So we put in there people in charge of risk governance, risk appetite, risk reporting, risk ID and assessment, capital management, stress testing, control framework, and so on and so forth. These are transversal skills which are needed by every risk type. And I'd come back to that. They should be acquired. Don't go too fast. Usually don't try to be the professional of stress testing in everything at the same time. You'd better start with something concrete and then elevate it to ERM once you've got a little bit of concrete experience. And finally, you've got also the third line of defense audit. I could say also you've got an appreciable amount of risk management skills among regulators now. And I would say it's the thing I've seen grow the most since a couple of financial crises. Every time regulators have gone bigger and more efficient and more knowledgeable at risk management. I would say that probably 30 years ago, they wouldn't know a lot. They would implement a number of organization rules and so on and so forth. And now there are real professionals going deep into details and able to challenge financial institutions deep inside. So what are the skills you need, finally, in all of that? And I'd concentrate that a little bit on my experience as an enterprise risk manager and risk manager. I've probably had like I've led thousands of interviews, probably hired hundreds of people if I count all the turnover over 20 years. My team is only 15 people now, but it used to be 150 at the group level. I can tell you that I saw a lot of people, and there's a lot of turnover because those skills are in high demand. So it's not like you hire people for life now. They rotate pretty quickly, especially if they're talented and looked after. So I usually put the skills we require in three buckets. First one is risk management experience per se. So I mean, people need to have a concrete hands-on experience. Nothing replaces that. No theory will ever replace the concrete experience on the field of managing risks. And I would say if you want to do risk management, you should aim at jobs that are less about theory than about practice. Of course, there are some risk types that I personally tend to prefer. I like operational risk, for example. It's an incredible growth area. But all of them are good, like credit risk, market risk, liquidity risk, compliance. Compliance is great as well. Legal risk, reputational risk, strategic risk. So it's good to have a cross-experience in finance and risk. All of those teach you what it is to be a first or a second line of defense, to do reporting, to build effective challenge, to communicate. That's absolutely key. Usually when I hire people after 10, 15 years of career, I look at what they've done. Let's say I have a candidate in operational risk. I'm going to go deep into how deeply this experience has been a change motivator in that person, how they've been able to acquire leadership and roles into that, how they've been able to change what they're doing. Remember, risk management is an area of constant change. You never do things the same way 5 years after 5 years. So first one, risk management experience. So always make sure that you'll get a deep, hands-on risk management experience, a real one, not too theoretical. Second thing, innovation, data, analytics, and systems. Don't be an IT specialist unless you work in IT risk or cyber, but be knowledgeable of how databases are built, how data are used, how analytics allow you to have predictive risk management rather than trailing risk management. That's key. That makes all the difference between an experienced risk manager, which was only reactive, and an experienced risk manager, which was forward-looking, which is able to anticipate, to see what's coming next, who can anticipate the things that the other people do not see yet. So that's very key. And there again, there is no way that the coming 40 years are going to be without technology. They're going to affect all of us, all of you, that's clear. Third thing, and we were touching on it, is I would say management, communication, writing skills, meaning human skills. It's very important. I tend to say one thing to juniors, the truth is not in the computer. Please, I don't want to see you sitting 8 hours a day in front of your computers. That's key. If I see them, there's something deeply wrong. That's not the kind of job that requires to sit 8 hours in front of a computer, even and especially if you work in modeling or in AI or in technology risk or anything. No, it's communication first. I tend to say successful risk managers are often seen in meetings with other people. They interact. So then they come to manage, which usually comes from a successful communication experience. Management is next and reveals leadership and all the good ideas about where we need to go next and bring a group of people with you. And then there's this good old skill that we always forget, writing. I have to say that usually not being a good writer tends to limit your abilities to to do a lot in risk management. You know, communicating to a board is essentially a skill of writing. And then to respond to the question we had before, there's something I like. Lawyers are extremely good at writing. So I have a number of lawyers or legal people doing extremely good careers in risk management, because whatever the ideas, they're able to bring them under a logical, well-built and clear form that is always super appreciated when it comes to top committees, executive management, boards of directors, and anything. And communication skills are also still in this world of today, maybe even more and more, communication skills. And think about communicating to the market as well. I did that for a few years, financial communication. My God, you need to really think about what you're going to write if you find yourself in a crisis. I remember managing risk communication during the European crisis and explaining how we were exposed to Southern European debt compared to other banks. Every word had to be chosen, every figure that was shown had to be clear, and the demonstration had to be convincing to investors. So keep that in mind, that's very important.
Great, thank you, Didier. There's a question here that, about businesses that are undergoing digital transformation. How well are they doing it? What are the risks involved in that process? Thomas?
Sure. You know, a couple years back when I first heard about digital transformation, I was very cynical, actually. I thought we don't use abacuses anymore, so we're going digital. Great. But in all seriousness, what's happening is you have really the coming together of technology, process, and people. On the technology side, you have topics like cloud computing, the accessibility, the ease of getting cloud services, applications, etc., combined with mobile, combined with the buzzwords of AI and ML. It's the perfect storm coming together. And from my perspective, what I see happening with digital transformation, it's enabling the business. And the business is helping themselves, and sometimes the business helps themselves too much. Here's where I have my risk hat on. Anyone with a credit card could try to purchase a cloud service that could satisfy a need that an IT team doesn't meet adequately. They can sign up for something like DocuSign, digital signatures. All it takes is a credit card. Well, on the risk side, you have to validate and vet your vendors. You have to make sure that they follow the same types of controls that you follow as an organization. That's kind of like the darker side of digital transformation. On the process side, there's still a lot of processes that are done in the back office and operations that are seriously dependent on paper, of all things. I've seen it with my own eyes. And finding efficiencies through these new technologies, again, it's great when it works. On the people side, you're starting to enable people with mobile devices, with laptops, working remotely, working from anywhere. But what happens if people are working from anywhere and you're a trader and you're at home and you're trying to execute a trade? Is your line recorded? From a compliance perspective, that's something you need to think about. From a business continuity perspective, you need to think about that as we deal with coronavirus. So for all of these new efficiencies that the digital transformation brings us, we can't forget, as an organization, we have management oversight of those risks. So as we use more vendors, as we go to the cloud, we have to have oversight over Amazon, Microsoft, AWS, etc. They have to go through the DDQs, the due diligence questionnaires. You have to have the business impact analyses. And on the cyber side, things will go wrong. So how do your vendors plug into your incident response strategy? All of this has to be clearly delineated, clearly understood, and go through the risk process. So yes, digital transformation, there is definitely momentum there. It has a lot of backing. It is not just a buzzword. It is happening, but we have to control it and make sure that that residual risk is manageable.
Thank you, Thomas. And we come to our lightning round question, which we ask each of our distinguished panelists to share with us what risk or risks, in their view, have percolated to the top and demand our attention. Start with Adam.
Sure. So I think this is all probably going to be from the perspective of where we work now. Again, I'm largely focused on building credit loss forecasting models. And the biggest risk that we have is that we really only have one, if not two, economic cycles over which to build our models. I think we all know pretty well that the future is not going to look like the past. And it's really challenging to combine a very limited time series data combined with the fact that our enterprises don't really have good data going back in history, in the cross-section, to be able to build models that are probably going to perform fairly well in the future. So the biggest thing I'm worried about is that we've spent an extraordinary amount of time, effort, and money to develop models to forecast the future and are limited ultimately by the data that we have.
Thank you. Didier?
My thing is a good old one. It's, I would say, systemic risk. So we all manage risks in silos, and in those periods where things are at normal levels, I would say, like for the past few years, managing in silos can look satisfactory. I've built this enterprise risk management function, and I can't say I'm so advanced regarding systemic risk, however. Systemic risk is made of something very specific, correlations that suddenly activate where you expect them the least. So probably they're not the same that were at work in 2008. They've built silently in nowadays world, and nothing of the normal world can prepare us to exactly what perfect storm of events will happen during a crisis. So one of the questions that we're looking at the moment, for example, is that coronavirus thing, the sparkle that is going to activate a much bigger systemic crisis with completely enforcing correlations between some operational risks. Are our system going to fail to be able to handle, let's say, a crazy volatility on the markets that are going to create also dislocations that we haven't seen coming, together with a credit risk where the most vulnerable sectors are not the ones where we have looked at because actually they were hit in an unpredictable way. If all that happens together, this is something that we've tried to prepare ourselves for, but that we are still, all of us, still ill-prepared. So this is what is my main concern today.
Thank you. Thomas?
So from my perspective, I think obviously I could say cyber, and I think, self-promotion there, but I think the rate of technological change, thinking big picture here, is not slowing down. And what I see down the line, it's the democratization of technology. Everyone has a smartphone, everyone has a laptop, everyone is potentially a hacker or hacked. And two things in particular worry me. Back in 2016, there was a phenomenon called the Mirai botnet, which led to something called a DDoS attack, or distributed denial of service attack. How did it start? It started because Internet of Things technology, IoT, home devices, your home router, your Nest, et cetera, suffered from a vulnerability that was easily exploited. It could be something as simple as a default password. It could be something like a password of password. Criminals were able to exploit that. They took remote control of those devices. They then decided to target different organizations like Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, et cetera. It's a huge outage of internet communication technology in 2016. It was contained. It could have been much worse. And all this comes about because everyone has access to these amazing technological tools, but without the appropriate background or skill or default settings to make sure they're secure. So that, for me, it's only a matter of time before something like that happens again, through the rate of change, through everything that's happening, that could target my organization, could target other banks as well. And the people who are participating in this type of attack don't even realize it. It's your grandparents who have a Nest who just got it for the holidays and don't know how to configure it. The second thing, real quick, is also the idea of quantum computing and quantum cryptography. Again, technology here, but potentially every single encryption algorithm, that which keeps your communications safe, that which allows for money transfers, that which allows for the padlock in your browser, could be invalid, could be obsolete, thanks to breakthroughs in quantum cryptography within the next 5 years. How that progresses, when criminals get access to that technology, when it actually becomes real, could be a game changer from a defender's perspective, and we have to try to be ahead of that curve.
Thank you, Thomas. Jay?
From credit risk point of view, I think everyone probably agrees that we're towards the end of the benign credit cycle, but we have been discussing about that for several years, so we don't know when this is going to turn. My bank has been preparing for the ultimate turn for years, but it's also it's not easy because there's so much liquidity in the market. So all the banks trying to lend money, and rates are so low, so the revenues is very low as well. So it's hard to balance, and the business is trying to expand at the top of the cycle while we're preparing for the downturn. That's something it's very hard to balance, but it's in the senior management's mind. We'll see how it goes.
Do you stress test your credit risk?
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
measures?
that's required. Yeah, but you never know when it's going to turn.
When the actual credit cycle begins to turn negative.
It's we're supposed to have recession years ago, a couple of years ago or so, but we're still going strong.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.